You found it, the Safety Pays podcast. I'm Christian Robbins, and today we're going to talk a little bit about safety, and specifically accident investigation and root cause analysis. So last week we had an accident on a job site that the details were very sketchy. And how this happened was I got a text saying there'd been an accident, but there was no communication on the severity of the accident or what had happened to the employee that had had the accident. The employee had had an accident on a job site, had a couple of other workers from a different trade help him off the job site to his vehicle, put him in his vehicle, where he then drove himself to the hospital. Not the hospital nearest the job site, but the hospital nearest his home, which was approximately 20 minutes from the job site. So, first of all, we need to make sure that we're establishing a communication process with all employees, that they know what to do and what the reporting protocol is when there's an accident. Normally, you would stop and contact a supervisor and let them know that you'd had an accident, especially if the accident involved fracture. So this involved multiple fractures in a left ankle. But he did not report it to his supervisor. What happened was the two men that helped him to his vehicle reported it to the site safety supervisor, that they just helped this gentleman into his vehicle after an accident. So no one knew the severity until a day after the accident had happened, when he was finally reachable by telephone and we could establish what had actually happened. So the investigation of the initial investigation of the accident happened without the employee and the employee's input. So we went off the scene and we went off the second-hand account of the two gentlemen that had helped him out of his predicament and into his vehicle. So what happened was he was working in a hallway and he was doing some layout, and there happened to be sheetrock leaned up against one side of the wall and Durarock or cement board leaned up on the other side of the wall. As he stood up, his nail bag that was on his utility belt snagged the sheets and caused them to start to tip. He was unable to get out of the way in time, and the Duracrete, the cement board, came down and trapped his left foot, injuring and fracturing his left ankle. Okay, each sheet of Durarock weighs about 96 pounds, and 7 sheets tipped. So for those of you that are better at math than I am, that's about 700 pounds. And so these other two gentlemen that happened to hear the accident and the commotion lifted the sheets off him and got him out. Now, on the site, he never removed his boot. He never took a look. He just said, "Hey, I've been hurt. I'm going to the hospital." Normally, there would be a little bit more documentation with an injury this serious. But a lot of times with a fracture like this, it is actually a good idea not to take the boot off at that point, because swelling will begin immediately once that boot is off. So we proceeded with the accident investigation without his input until the next day. Once we talked to him, he was unsure of the details. He said, "I think my bag caught the boards and caused them to tip because they were standing pretty straight up." Now, this makes root cause analysis a little bit difficult. But one of the things that we understand is anytime there's material that's stacked or leaned upon a wall, there's a chance that it's going to tip over. And when you have materials that are heavy, that are stacked too close to vertical, they can fall and they can cause quite a bit of damage. In this case, the hallway was wide enough for the individual to get out of the way had there not been sheetrock staged and leaned up against the opposite wall. So the 4-foot wide cement board took up almost 100% of the space that was left over in the hall as it tipped over. As it was, there was about a 5.5, 6 inch gap where it came down on his ankle and injured that. So, root cause analysis. How do we find out what was the actual cause? Was the cause the bag catching and tipping the Durarock over, or was it the fact that the cement board, the Durarock, was leaned too close to vertical against the wall? My choice is the Durarock was leaned too close to vertical against the wall. The accident would not have happened had that Durarock not been there, because his bag would not have caught it, so it would not have mattered. So, as we did corrective action on this accident, we decided that this material, the cement board, would no longer be staged leaned against a wall. And it would only be staged laying horizontally on the floor inside the units and not in hallways. Now, we also looked at the drywall that is often staged leaning against walls, and we decided to make sure that that was secure so that it wouldn't tip over, that 3-inch screws would be driven into each side of the sheetrock stacks, and then wire would be tied back to screws also in the studs, so that would eliminate the possibility of that tipping over. Also, they would have to be leaned at an angle and never close to vertical, so that that weight transfer would not happen and tip the board towards the hallway. Now let's talk a little bit about the specifics of the investigation and how that should proceed. So in this case, we weren't able to do an interview with the injured employee at the first instance, and in a lot of cases that'll happen because emergency responders will have transported the injured employee. In the case of fatality, you won't be able to interview the injured or the deceased employee. So what needs to happen is you need to look for any witnesses, or in this case, the best thing we had next to witnesses, which were the people that came and lifted the rock, the Durarock, off his foot. So we started by taking pictures of the scene and then measurements and looking at the weight of each sheet that was involved, the number of sheets, and you need to be very detailed and very thorough in your investigation as far as showing what was happening right before the accident, the cause of the accident, and then all the details of the accident. So in this case, this gentleman that was involved in the accident was doing some layout, working next to this Durarock. He could have requested the Durarock been moved prior to him starting his project, because it was in close enough proximity that it would interfere with the steel framing that he was going to do around some utilities that would then be sheetrocked. And so he could have requested that those be moved at that time before he had begun. But he decided to proceed, and then the accident happened. And so we knew that there were 10 sheets of Durarock stacked. We knew that by the way the stacks that were still standing up, that the bottom hadn't slid out, but they'd actually tipped over. Top had tipped and fallen. We knew the width of the corridor because we measured that. We knew the weight of the Durarock because we knew what a bundle weighed. And so that was pretty quick to figure out what each individual sheet weighed. We knew the space that the other sheetrock was taking, and we knew the angle at which the Durarock or cement board was leaned against the wall because of the 3 sheets that were left standing near vertical on the wall. So 10 sheets total, 7 tipped over, 3 left on the wall, and that gave us an idea of what caused this accident. Now, a lot of times you won't have 100% of the details as you're doing the investigation. Had all of those the Durarock sheets tipped over, we wouldn't have known exactly how close to vertical they were stacked. But we would have been able to look underneath them and see if there were scrape marks. So we'd know if they had slid and fallen or if they'd actually tipped over. That's really the problem that we run into when we stage materials leaning on walls, is that they'll either slip out or they'll tip over. There's a very fine line where you have to have the angle just right so that you don't have the bottom slide out and you don't have the top tip over. So as we did the investigation, we looked for all the causes. We figured out what was going on, who was involved, how it happened, and then we came up with some ideas of how to not let that happen again. And we've talked about a little bit of that. But one of the other things that I haven't mentioned yet is this gentleman usually worked with a partner as he was doing installation and build out. It just so happened that on this day of the accident, his partner had called in sick, and he had not sought anyone else to help him, and he was basically working alone. So fortunate event that the gentlemen from the other trades were there to hear the sound of the Durarock tipping over and him yelling once it hurt his foot and broke his ankle, so that he could be rescued. Now, had someone else been there working with him, they may have been able to see what was going on and stop it. They may have requested that they move the Durarock first. There's a lot of different scenarios. So one of the big things that we look at is when we have individuals that are working alone, is it really necessary that they work alone? Sometimes it's not as efficient to have two people doing the job. However, in a circumstance like this, it is safer to have two people because one can assist the other, and anytime there's the possibility of something going wrong, you have two sets of eyes and two brains trying to figure out the problems. So, just to sum up, as we've talked a little bit about an accident and accident investigation and root cause analysis. First thing you need to do, find the scene, secure the scene, interview the person that's had the accident or the witnesses, or in this case, the people that can give you the best description of what happened, because there were no witnesses and we were unable to interview the person involved in the accident at the time. Recreate the circumstances to the best of your ability. Take pictures, take measurements, understand the weights of anything that was involved, make, model, manufacturer of anything that was involved in the accident, take thorough notes about the timeline, the sequence of events, what happened just before, and what led up to that accident. Treat every accident, no matter how minor, really big deal. The thing we want to do is impress upon all of our employees that accidents don't have to happen, and that when they do, they're serious, and we want to make sure they never happen again. So get to that root cause, get to the moment that happened, and then solve that problem. Do corrective action. Write it down. Show what happened, how it happened, and what you've done to prevent it from ever happening again. If we do all those things, then going forward, we will not repeat that accident. So the reality is this accident was totally preventable. Had the guys thought about what they were doing when they leaned that material up along the wall, they would not have leaned it there because the wall already had an obstruction on the opposite side of the hallway. Once you've completed the investigation and you've decided what the root cause is, at that point, gather all of your employees together, talk to them about corrective action, talk to them about how the accident happened and how it will be prevented going forward. That way, we're making sure that we don't repeat the same accidents over and over again. This has been the Safety Pays podcast. I'm Christian Robbins. DCSHRM.com is the website for safety resources to train your employees so that they can recognize hazards and avoid those accidents.